Mr. Ed stole the hearts of viewers everywhere, and the horse just became a megastar through the hit sitcom that was named after him. Wilbur Post and his talking horse just captivated their audiences with their comedical tales. And although this show didn't enjoy massive ratings, it gained high recognition from those who watched it. The show basically had two lead characters operating as a comedy team. The title role of Mr. Ed was played by a palomino that was voiced by Western actor Alan Lane. The role of Ed's owner, a klutzy architect named Wilbur Post, was played by Alan Young. The characters live at 17230 Valley Spring Road in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. A lot of the program's gags revolve around Mr. Ed's tendency to talk only to Wilbur and his skills as an obnoxious and inconsiderate troublemaker. His human-like behavior far exceeds anything that those around Wilbur would expect from a horse. One of the running gags of the show is that characters around them hear Wilbur talking to Ed, and they always ask who he's talking to. Another gag centers around Wilbur being accident-prone and inadvertently causing harm to himself and others. Now, they chose Alan Young for this part because they felt like he just fit it so well. They felt like he was just the person that a horse would really talk to. Now, this character really traces back to 1937. The character of Mr. Ed was created for a series of short stories under the title The Talking Horse. Liberty Magazine began publishing the stories on September 18, 1937. In those magazine stories, Mr. Ed not only spoke, but got drunk. The show's concept is similar to the Francis the Talking Mule movies from 1950 to 1955. The show really came about from a UCLA graduate named Sonia Shurness, and she pitched the idea for the show. She was working at Warner Brothers as a secretary to the director Arthur Lubin in the 1940s. She was also a fan of Walter Brooks's short stories about the talking horse, and she introduced this idea to her boss Lubin. She went on to really push the idea, and because of it, was given screen credit reading format development by Sonia Shurness. The executive producer of the show was George Burns. For some reason, no one else showed any interest in bringing a talking horse to the masses. He also financed the $70,000 pilot episode and later appeared in the second season of the show. In Season 2, Episode 18, he is offering $25,000 for a great new novelty act, so Wilbur begs Mr. Ed to talk to Mr. Burns. Despite the rock star tendencies that arose occasionally, the horse that played Mr. Ed was entirely professional. It was common for the horse to complete his scenes in one take. His scenes were often complicated, involving a fair amount of physical activity, stunts, and training. Some of the scenes often included teaching the horse how to play different sports or ride a skateboard. One of the producers stated one time that the horse was really easier to work with than some of the humans that he had to deal with. He said it seemed like the humans were messing up the shots more than the horse was. Now let's talk a little bit about the horse that played Mr. Ed. Born in 1949, the horse was given the name of Bamboo Harvester, and he was the son of two purebred horses. He was also owned by Les Hilton. This horse really called all the shots when he was shooting. When he decided that he was finished for the day, reportedly he would simply walk off the set and just call it quits. Now the horse's father was called Harvester, and this was also a very revered horse in the Palomino Horse Association. The star Alan Rocky Lane was the uncredited voice behind the iconic horse. His voice made the character extremely distinct. Lane's name was intentionally withheld from the credits, and the producers, when asked about this, stated that the actor really wanted to remain nameless. But that wasn't true. The producers wanted it to seem mystical, and they didn't want that voice associated with a cowboy, who in real life wasn't a horse. After the show took off, Rocky Lane complained about not having screen credit and lobbied to get it, but he accepted a pay raise instead. Now, Mr. Ed had his own stunt double. He had a horse named Pumpkin, who looked identical to him. The only difference was a gold spot on the horse's white patch. Now, to deal with this, the crew covered up with makeup this area when shooting scenes. They always had Pumpkin on the set, and Pumpkin was often the one that posed for publicity photos. Pumpkin also learned the same tricks in case Bamboo Harvester ever had to be replaced. He also stood in for many of the public appearances that took place, including the Hollywood Christmas Parade. Bamboo Harvester was originally scheduled to work the parade, but they had the horse up early on the set that morning, and the trainers were worried that the parade would put undue stress on the horse. So what'd they do? They let Pumpkin stand in for the horse, and no one was the wiser. Now, Mr. Ed had a huge appetite. He consumed about 20 pounds of hay, and get this, a gallon of sweet tea each day. He loved sweet tea. Must have been a southern horse. Now, Alan Young told people that they used to put peanut butter on his gums to get him to move his lips. Later on, he told everybody that he just made that up. He really didn't know why he said that, but it sounded like a good story. And I had always heard that my entire life, that was the way that they got Mr. Ed to talk, because he was trying to lick the peanut butter off. But that's not how they did it at all. Les Hilton used a string to initiate movement with the horse's lips and tongue. I believe the procedure is actually called threading, and that term comes from putting this thread into the lips, and the horse tries to get the thread out and mimics the movements of talking. As time went on, he began to learn to move his lips without this prompt, and all they had to do to get him to move his mouth was to touch his hoof. Later on, they were able to teach him to start moving his lips after Alan Young finished speaking. It's amazing what this horse could do. Now, although the director wasn't successful in finding a network to produce the show, he managed to get single sponsor identification over 100 stations. Production began in November of 1960, and after Mr. Ed's syndication proved its worth, CBS picked it up after 26 episodes. Alan Young's hair was naturally light. It was blonde, and it seemed like it blended too much with Mr. Ed's coat and mane. To combat this problem, they constantly dyed Young's hair. After the show was over, he let it go back to his normal color. Perhaps the most discussed event in the life of Bamboo Harvester was his death. Multiple theories about his death exist. One theory suggested that the horse was euthanized due to illness in a small Oklahoma town. Alan Young wrote in his autobiography that the horse died later than many really thought he did. He wrote that he used to visit the horse in his retirement at a stable in Burbank, California, and that the horse really died eventually of old age. Another theory was that the horse was running free at an Oklahoma farm when he ultimately died of old age in an undisclosed year. And still another theory has owner Les Hilton scattering the horse's ashes in an undisclosed location in California. Who knows which one of these is true? I know they do have something erected in Oklahoma that's somewhat like a tombstone, where a horse is buried that is supposedly Bamboo Harvester. I don't know who's telling the truth in this. I enjoy Mr. Ed. It's a funny show to watch, and how they pull this off is pretty amazing. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.